Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on. Today we're going to be taking a look at They Bleed Pixels for the Nintendo Switch. And as this is the last in our series of spooky October games, I can finally get back to playing every other type of game on the eShop, so I'm actually a little bit psyched. But diving into the story of They Bleed Pixels, I was kind of surprised that it actually has one, because you don't normally get a story as much as just a scenario in technical and punishing platformers. So playing as a little goth girl who's been sent off to a home for troubled young girls, at some point in her studies in this boarding school environment, she's discovered an arcane tome that seeks to take over her body and transform her into her stabbiest, slashiest demonic self. And that is pretty much where we hit the ground running with the tutorial for the game. And I know what you're thinking, tutorial, it's a platformer, like what do you really need? And while I 100% understand that perspective, you actually might want to pay attention to this one, because the entire game's combat system, yes, this is actually an action platformer. But getting back to it, the game's entire combat system is based on one-button combat. And so while one button jumps, the other button will handle every single flourish of melee attacks you could possibly pull off. And so there will be a wealth of button combinations with directional keys and jumping to be able to formulate the combos that you'll need to actually farm in the game to build up enough points to start actually producing your own checkpoints. And I know that I just dumped a lot of information out of the chute, but one of the ways that this game, They Bleed Pixels, differentiates itself from other games like Super Meat Boy, and even more classic platformers like Awesome P, is the fact that it does integrate its own unique combat system, as well as a very unique take on checkpoints. As you make your way through the game's campaign, you'll be moving through chapter after chapter and being given a little bit more of the story through some animated cutscenes. But no matter which chapter of the game you find yourself in, there are a certain amount of things besides platforms that are really going to occupy your attention. The combat system in They Bleed Pixels is not only unique for the very fact that it exists, but it also has its combination attack system linked to a multiplier that helps you collect and build checkpoints. This, combined with any points you can get from scavenging little blood pools that are spread across the level, will help you make sure that you can maintain and not lose any progress by planting down checkpoints pretty much wherever you want. Or at least that's how it's described. And so at least in the earliest levels of the game, you can possibly make it to the end avoiding combat and not really focusing on the little collectible blood drops. The further you get into the game, the more of a focus you're going to have on those things just to make sure that you don't have to start everything over from scratch. And believe me, the deeper you get into the game, the more you're going to wish there were more things to collect and more enemies to kill. But other than the absolutely brutal nature of the game, the visuals in They Bleed Pixels are probably one of its larger selling points. The pixel work and the animation of the sprites, as well as the graphic cutscenes between chapters, they just really add to and enhance the quality of the game. I mean, really, how often do you find animated cutscenes in a platformer? And the audio as well is definitely noteworthy. In this kind of technical platforming game, you are bound to repeat certain sections of levels over and over and over. And so in that sense, anything that seems to be even the slightest bit repetitious can become quickly infuriating. And while there obviously isn't an infinite number of audio tracks in this game, the way that they were composed and staged in the levels, you never really feel as though the audio for the game is truly repetitive. And so in that sense, whatever the audio composer did in this game deserves a little bit of praise. But despite said praises, that doesn't mean that They Bleed Pixels is completely without flaw. And even if you are a fan of brutally punishing technical platformers that really push you to your limits as a gamer, even then, there are some things that you might want to note before diving in. First and foremost would probably have to be the control scheme of the game, for two reasons. Anyone who is a platforming fan knows that the technical nature of platforming requires really precise and responsive controls. And unfortunately, while certainly not game-breaking, they do feel a little bit fluffy in They Bleed Pixels. And while I can't be 100% certain that it's not at least partially due to a latency issue with my Pro Controller, the further you get into They Bleed Pixels, the more evident it'll become that the controls aren't probably as responsive as they should be. But again, not game-breaking, you get used to it, you learn to play through it. But on the same note as the control scheme is the combat system of the game. Being a one-button combat system was truly innovative and really neat and original. But while you don't really need to rely on explicitly farming combo multipliers in early game, the later you get into the game, you will have to be able to get enough points to manifest a checkpoint. And so while the creators of the game were explicit about really hating on button mashers, having a one-button combat system does seem to unnecessarily overcomplicate the controls. I mean, if we were playing on a NES controller that only had 2 buttons, flippin' phenomenal. But with the wealth of input controls available, there's really no reason there couldn't be a kick button, a punch button, a dash button, and what have you. Though, again, just like the semi-floating mechanics, the longer you play, the more you get used to it and the more semi-intuitive it becomes. But extending the focus from the combat multiplier to the actual way to manifest checkpoints brings us to one of the game's larger issues, which is the checkpoint system itself. Checkpoints can be put down anywhere you want, or at least that's kind of how it's brought forward in the game. However, this isn't exactly true because it requires 2 fundamental things. The first is that your checkpoint multiplier is full, and the second is that you have stable, flat ground to be able to put a checkpoint on. And so while in chapters probably 1 through 3, that's literally anywhere in the game, the further you get into it, your checkpoint locations are pretty much predetermined by level design. Which does, in a kind of objective sense, completely moot the need to be able to place your own checkpoints. Because if that's the only place you can place it in the middle of a level, then why not just make it static? Now, I know what you're thinking, the game is supposed to be hard and I'm just bad at it. And in all honesty, yeah, I'm kind of bad at this game, and it took me well over an hour to make it past some of these individual levels. And taking a step back and looking at They Bleed Pixels objectively as a whole experience, I gotta say, it's pretty good. Though it's also incredibly frustrating. And so I'd have to advise, if you're not a platforming fan, They Bleed Pixels, even though it looks cute and adorable and promises the ability to keep your progress flowing smoothly with infinite checkpoints, it might not exactly be the experience you think it is. And for oh so many of my friends out there that actually are hardcore gamers and are huge buffs of technical platforming, HB, I'm totally looking at you, I'm already calling it, this is your type of game. For those type of gamers, you will get what you're looking for. But with the learning curve of the combat system, the control scheme, and probably the checkpoints, even you all might have a tendency to rage quit every now and again. But hey, I mean, you know, that's like half the fun. So if you are a fan of games like Awesome P, Awesome P2, Super Meat Boy especially, or other technical platformers like Celeste, They Bleed Pixels might be a must-have for you. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of They Bleed Pixels now on the Nintendo Switch, so if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw us a like or a comment to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. Because there are new and unique indie games coming out literally every single day, and there are thousands of them out there. And so whether it's an easy hard pass or an absolutely unforgettable gem, chances are if it's on the eShop, you're gonna find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been the Budget Gamer, so as always, thanks for watching.